Greetings, chess fans. My name is Arturs Neiksans. I'm the leading Latvian chess grandmaster, and I'm continuing the video series on how to properly trade your pieces in chess. So there's a couple of principles I would like to highlight. Very often, it seems that when you're trading the bishop for the bishop, knight for the knight, queen for the queen, rook for the rook, etc., it's the same. But it's not really the case, because very often it really matters how many squares these pieces control. And when it comes to trading knights for the bishops, there's a common rule that bishops best operate in open positions and knights are better in closed positions. So my advice will be never give up a bishop for the knight unless you get something real out of this. So anyway, let me show you a couple of examples which are going to highlight what I would like to talk about. So this is the very first example from my beloved Dutch Leningrad defense from the black's perspective. White just played c5, and his idea is pretty obvious. He wants to activate his pieces. If black is going to take on c5, white's going to take with the bishop, and white is pretty active. And now suddenly black plays knight g4, an intermezzo move, which is seemingly like a pawn sacrifice. Now, very clearly, it becomes clear for white that the pawn on d6 is not going to hold. Like, for example, queen d6, c takes on d6. Black eliminates the bishop on e3, and after rook d8 and bishop e5, simply collects the pawn on d6 and has a monstrous bishop pair in an open position. So that's why here, knight on g4, black is happy to trade the bishop, and let's say if white agrees to this trade, as you can see, the position is opening up. Let me not blunder the bishop on d6, let's say bishop f7, and then this bishop on g7 essentially has no counter arguments. Also, how to make sure that if this is a good case to trade, for example, the bishop for the knight, you can count the amount of pieces they control. So the knight can control the maximum of 8 squares. Like here, actually, it's less. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and you see we're missing 7 and 8 to the right. When you count the amount of squares of the bishop, for example, if there would be this trade included, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and sometimes if you give the bishop a longer diagonal, it's just pure mathematics. The bishop almost always is better. So that's why here after knight g4, white had to spare the bishop, and white played bishop d4. Now comes the intermezzo move d takes on c5. White basically has no choice unless he's happy to give up the pawn on c5 for no good reason. So a bishop takes on c5 happened, hitting the rook on f8. And after rook e8 and h3, white was not in time to get rid of the knight because very nice intermezzo move queen a5, hitting the bishop on c5. There's all kinds of rook d8 happening, and basically white had to settle for the trade. H takes, g takes, and queen f5. And now we compare the pieces. So we have about same amount of strength bishops on g2 and e6, but you see this knight on c3 is simply controlling less squares. Again, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and this bishop on g7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Actually, it's about the same, but if I position on e5, it's going to be more, and again, the position is going to open up. That's the rule of thumb I would strongly recommend you to follow. Now the next position here is, again, black just play knight a6 and is threatened to play knight b4. So you might be thinking, oh, how about I just take on a6? Now this will be pretty terrible. Why is this? Because the position inevitably is going to open up. So black will find a moment to trade the c pawn for the d pawn. Black will find an opportunity to play f5, play bishop e6, and very quickly white will have no counter arguments to, counter the activity of black's light square bishop. So that's why here, instead of taking on a6, what we want to do, we want to play c3 and limit this knight. Also notice the bishop on g7, because a very common trend basically, especially at the club level, is try to trade it. You know, I've seen it so many times. Why I play stuff like bishop f4, queen c1, and trades on h6. Pardon the wrong arrow. We're going to talk about it in the next examples, but first let's check this one. So black play bishop e6, bishop f4, just position the pieces of good squares and see what happens. queen b6, queen c1, bishop d5. Now you see black is threatening to take on f3. Actually, you could argue if this is a good trade because the knight on f3 doesn't really control that amount of good squares. But by doing this, black accomplishes something. And by the way, this is also what I strongly recommend you to think about. If you give up the bishop for the knight, do it for a very good reason. And the reason here, it's pretty good. Yeah, you're just destroying the defenses of your opponent's king and you have the queens on the board. So I played knight e2 and black played c5. All of this makes perfect sense. So black is trying to open up the position, like activate the pieces. So d takes on c5, knight takes on c5, f5, and white is clearly passive. And what happened here is probably a shock to black because white unexpectedly took on a6. And didn't I just tell you, do not take on a6 because the power of the last square bishop is going to increase? Yes, I did. But again, chess is very fluid and the circumstances, they change very quickly. So the point here, bishop takes on a6 is a very concrete solution because white gets to play c4, d5, establish a strong pass pawn, and black's bishop pair doesn't really do much. You might be arguing, why not do this immediately? Why not play c4 here and then play d5 and essentially have the same idea? Well, black can include knight b4, and now this knight on b4 is going to be much stronger than the bishop on d3. So white already is envisioning to play c4, d5, and that's why he includes bishop takes on a6, even though position is semi-open. And a couple of moves later, white manages to normalize the position, and knight c3, knight b5, now it becomes pretty apparent that white is better. Let me show you another example here. So this, by the way, is something I already mentioned in the previous example. How about trading the bishop on h6? So to be honest, I have seen this even up to a title level. Players very often do not pay attention when this is a good idea and when this is a bad idea. After all, when you look at the amount of the squares these pieces control, you see the bishop here on e3, it controls more squares. The bishop on g7 is pretty passive. But this position is an exception because by trading this bishop, you're ready to start a kingside attack. That's why bishop h6 is a great idea, because you're going to play h4, h5, maybe even g4, g5, take on g7, and you continue with the direct attack. Even though you trade a better bishop for a worse bishop, you expose your opponent's king. Now, a bad example would be this one. So black just played queen c8 and is threatening to play bishop h3. And very often, players here, especially at the club level, they like to play rook e1, bishop h3, bishop h1, and then somehow get rid of this bishop on h3. But I question really the need, because if you look at the position, does it really seem to you that black is ready to start a kingside attack? This is not the same, and the bishop on f5 is actually stronger because of the bishop on g2, because it controls more squares. So what white can do, white can simply ignore this idea and simply focus on playing for the center. So black was trying to carry out this idea, the pawn on b7 required protecting, white played c4, black did carry out his bishop h3 idea, big success, right? But actually no, now that white rearranged his pieces, white played e4, and suddenly it becomes very apparent that white is calling all the shots. And the final couple of examples I would like to show you the space advantage. And there's a rule in chess: if you have a considerable space advantage, which means you control more lines, more squares, more files, you do not want to trade pieces. Why is this? Because your opponent is suffocated and he wants to trade off some pieces so that the remaining pieces have more space to operate. It's really easy. So that's why the obvious idea is to play knight f3 here. This is, by the way, a very famous game by Jose Raul Capablanca, and then proceed squeezing your opponent by playing a4, b5, and then maybe at some point you go back with knight e5. Another example here, this is one of my games, so black just played knight e5, seemingly a great knight. It controls 8 squares. This bishop on c4 controls less. It's like 1, 2, 3, yeah, maybe 4, I don't know, doesn't really count, 3 squares. But yet, white declines, and white plays bishop e2. Why is this? Because now this bishop on e2 controls even more squares, And after the following move, f4, black will be pushed back and he will be lacking space. And this is how the game continued. Knight e8, knight c7, black wants to trade pieces or penetrate the d4 square. White says no to that. Rook b7, knight e1, knight e3, knight b6. So black is anticipating knight c4 idea to initiate some more trades, to organize counter play against the pawn on b3. But you see, so many black pieces are having a party at this very limited square, and that's why we are enjoying a space advantage. We don't want to trade, and you can start a kingside attack. That's it. If you are interested to check it out, check out 2 of my bootcamps. I did a previous bootcamp, like a pretty long video about how to properly trade pieces, and also my bootcamp about the space advantage and what rules you should follow. So thank you for watching this, and of course, as usual, if you enjoyed the video, please do not forget to press like and subscribe to my channel, as I will be making more videos. Thank you. I'm signing off.